Now, we wanted to include in our program today some information about practical resources about promoting civility in our respective workplaces, organizations, and lives. And we are very pleased to have with us today Makayla Meachem to share information about the National Institute for Civil Discourse and the Revive Civility Ohio initiative, so that we may be all informed about opportunities to put into practice the general lessons we have been discussing today. Ms. Meachem is the program manager at the National Institute for Civil Discourse, where she coordinates two programs, Next Generation and Text, Talk, Revive Civility. Ms. Meachem has a bachelor's degree in international studies and American foreign policy, and she is a former Legislative Service Commission Fellow, having worked in the office of State Senator Charlita Tavares. Let's welcome Makayla Meachem. Thanks so much for doing it.
Hello. It's wonderful to be here with all of you. I'm really enjoying these stories. So my presentation is a little bit different because I'm going to focus on some of the tools that we provide, but I do have a short story just so you know how the Institute started. I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with the former Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords. Okay. So when Gabby was involved in the shooting that greatly injured her and killed several others in Tucson, the community decided we need to do something. We need to create a positive result out of this situation, and we need to focus on dialogue. And so they created the National Institute for Civil Discourse, and they headquartered it at the University of Arizona. So that's where we're headquartered. But we have a remote office in Columbus, Ohio, where I work with one other individual, former Representative Ted Celeste, and we also have a DC office, and we are spaced out all over the country doing research to try to inform the programs that we operate. And so, to start with, I just want to let you know kind of the grand scheme of the programs that we offer. Oh, perfect. Okay. And so you'll see this little three-pronged wheel type thing in the middle, and these are the three target areas that we work with because whoever started the Institute decided in order to have a functioning democracy, we need to have elected officials that are working together to try to solve the problems that the public needs solved, and we need them to be working with the public. We need the public actually working to correspond with the elected officials so it's not a closed loop of just electeds talking to the public and then not receiving anything from the public. And then we need journalists that actually inform and educate the public so that they can participate in the democracy. And so having all of these three groups working together and also working better within their group was the approach that the Institute wanted to take. And so we created programs around those three target areas. So for instance, Creating Community Solutions was a public program to focus on mental health and trying to decrease the stigma around that and have dialogues around mental health issues. Text, Talk, Vote was one that was obviously trying to encourage voting, asking individuals if they plan to vote, why they wouldn't want to vote, what issues they wanted to see on ballots that would make them actually turn out to vote, or what issues they wanted candidates to support so they'd come out to vote. I'll talk about Text, Talk, Revive Civility and Next Generation soon because those are two prominent programs that are directly they're the main functioning parts of the Revive Civility initiative. And so Fazil mentioned this, and Revive Civility is an initiative for the public. We worked a lot with journalists and elected officials for a while, and the public was really crying out after the 2016 election for more ways to engage with one another and engage with both journalists and elected officials. And so we took up that task of trying to find ways that they could take collaborative actions together to do that. And so just to give you a framework of how we at the Institute define civility, when we go out and do programs, we define it as civility showing respect to someone else, whether or not they send that respect back to you, and because we can't control that. And then we consider civil discourse being this dialogue and exchange where you are both giving each other mutual respect and maintaining that throughout disagreements and maybe even getting really passionate and discussing things in depth, but still maintaining that respect for each other as individuals. And so this is just some humor, if it's humorous still. We do a lot of studies, and so sometimes I just replace the studies with this. But I will show a couple things that we think are important to note to people. Oftentimes when I present, people will respond afterwards saying like, oh wow, I thought like it was just me and some other people who thought it was really bad. And we're like, no, it is everyone who's feeling this. A lot of people really. And so this study from 2017 was showing that the future of the nation, and then you'll see that the fourth one was the current political climate, were the most common sources of stress. You know, and that had never been on this survey before, the current political climate. That was the first time. So we went from it not being on there to being one of the most stressful causes of, or most common causes of stress. And so we took that really seriously. And here it shows that this perspective is shared by all different age groups. And we wanted people to know this because sometimes older generations might think that younger generations don't pick up on this and don't see the denigration of civil discourse, but we do. And you see this across all these generations. And so I think this is really helpful for people to see that they're all sharing this same perspective. And so Next Generation is one of the programs I coordinate, and I know it's with state legislators, so it might seem a little weird to mention it, but as you know, sometimes even more than Congress, the state legislatures can greatly affect our lives. They're passing sometimes 20 to 40,000 bills a year. Congress passes like a few hundred sometimes, you know? And so it's really impactful. And so the program Next Generation was established to try to reach state legislators before they get to Congress, because 50% of Congress comes from the state legislatures in their states. And so we thought if we can develop a group of legislators who care about being respectful and fostering civil discourse within their states, within their communities and the state house, then maybe when they get to Congress, or maybe when they run for governor or something else, they'll be better prepared and they'll have already committed to this and people will know them for it and hold them more accountable. And so the program does a workshop called Building Trust Through Civil Discourse, and it's all about just creating relationships between these legislators. Could you imagine working with people to solve great issues, like huge problems in your state, and you don't even know them? The most you know about them is maybe what they said in their campaigns, and we all know how nasty those are now. So it's just a huge issue. So Ted Celeste is a former Ohio rep, and when he was leaving the House, he was like, I have to do something about this. And luckily, he actually attended a program at his church that was on faith and politics. And they talked about civil discourse, and he crafted this workshop for state legislators based on what he did at his church. And of course, with legislators, we have to make it a little bit formatted for them to accept it, right? They're not going to just be all touchy-feely and agree that they should just kumbaya. They're not doing that. So we learned how to get them to be more empathetic for each other through a process. We start by laying ground rules so that everybody knows exactly how they want to behave with one another, what behaviors are not acceptable, and what we want to encourage, and how we're going to hold each other accountable if things get heated or someone gets excited, you know. And the crux of this workshop is that we build to the point where we allow them to have a moment where they get to share with each other the experience, person, or time in their life that most impacted who they are today, what values they possess, why they are the person they are, why they vote the way they do. And this isn't a story of how they got elected, it's a story of who they are and why. So you get the most beautiful stories from this. And it is such an enlightening process to watch. So we have them think about this, and then they write their story, summarize it on a large Post-it note, and then we have on one of the walls kind of like a gallery where we put the decades, like from the 40s to the 2010s, and they put underneath those dates or the decades when that event happened, and they put it on the wall. And then after everyone has written something down, they all go through and they walk through the gallery and read all these stories. And so for the first time, they're seeing these people as stories, as more than just these Republicans, you know, someone who always, you know, tables their amendments or something. And so then we give them the chance to sit down and who would like to share? Who would like to share their stories? And sometimes it can be a little slow, but once someone is vulnerable and really tells a story, people want to share. And then you just see the whole room being more connected and looking at each other like, oh my goodness. And so the first time we did this in Ohio was back in 2012. I joined the Institute in 2015, so I wasn't there yet. But this story has always been beautiful to me because two legislators from Ohio, a Democrat from Cleveland and a Republican from Marysville, two women, they attended the workshop and they had never had a relationship or really spoken to each other at all. But during the workshop, they both had shared stories and found out one had been adopted and the other had been in foster care. So they had mutual interest in this issue. And they decided to sponsor a bill that the Ohio Adoption Association had been working on for 27 years. And they passed it in a few months. It was just the perfect time of session, so they got it through. And also bipartisan support, it helps. And that bill affected up to 410,000 Ohioans who had been adopted past 1993 and couldn't access records from their birth parents from some confidentiality legal issue that should have been resolved years ago. And they resolved that from building that relationship. And we've seen numerous accounts of not necessarily all the legislation gets passed because it often takes a lot longer than the few months that they did it. But we've seen amendments go into bills that would have never made it into a bill. And we've seen minority members who have been able to actually pass legislation and make their constituents feel some hope that they can actually pass something in the legislature. And they wouldn't have been able to pass that if they hadn't developed better relationships with members of the majority party during the workshop and then continued it afterwards. And so all of the workshops end with the participants creating an action agenda of items they need to implement in order to foster greater civility within the state. And oftentimes this means they want to have this training for all new members when they come in so that once you're elected, you immediately sit down with your colleagues and develop relationships. You show each other who you really are and not focus on the partisanship. And this has been a challenge. We've been in 16 states, but as you can imagine, most majority parties find this a bit threatening to allow for relationships between the two parties to develop because they realize that maybe more will get done. So these are some pictures from the workshops. Just people getting together to talk. It's very informal in some ways. I mean, we have paper, we're just writing all the notes, we leave them up for everybody to see. We type those up afterwards to send to everyone, and we help follow up to see what action items are being implemented, how those are helping the legislature, and what they need to actually accomplish these goals. And sometimes it's just some ideas. And so sometimes we help provide those, but oftentimes the legislators come up with really great ideas, and then we share those with other states if they're interested to share the best practices and how things have worked. And I'll share one other thing is, for instance, I don't know how many of you have participated in committee hearings at the State House. They don't advertise them, so it's difficult to know when they are. But for those who have attended them, they can be really challenging for the people testifying, depending on how the chair responds to the individual testifying, and also how the chair operates that committee, because the chair may well treat the minority members like they're not even on that committee at all. And so some of the individuals that are chairs of committees in states who work with our program have started running their committees differently. So for instance, consulting before each committee hearing with their ranking member of the minority party, discussing things, making sure they're on the same page and they can inform both parties, and also making sure that seating is never by party or the same every time, but mixing it up every single meeting so they're always sitting by different people and kind of being more collegiate. And so we've had, like I said, 16 workshops now, and over 750 legislators have participated in a workshop in their state, but we've had hundreds of others participate in the workshop at conferences and other things that we've gone to try to show people, you can do this in your state here. And so we give them a taste of it. And so because of that, we wanted to bring these legislators together to form a network so that they could continue supporting each other, because they needed to know that there were other people out there like them who also cared about civil governance. And so we created this national network of state legislators committed to civil governance. It's a very long name. And we have co-chairs every year. I'm not sure if anyone knows Senator Frank LaRose, and the other two are Terry Hayes, currently running for governor as an independent in Maine, and then Representative Melissa Wintrow in Idaho. Just some wonderful individuals who decided to step up and volunteer to take the lead on this. And the network is where I bridge into everything else, because we had these state legislators really passionate about change and civil discourse and more dialogue around issues. But a lot of times they hit walls in their state legislatures, and there's not always something they can do. And they're like, what can we do? So we decided to get them more involved with our Revive Civility initiative and connect them better with the public. And something that the public was asking for, and some of the legislators had been complaining about quite a bit, was the tenor and candor of campaigns now, and how awful it's gotten, especially since 2016, and a lot of new normals that came out. And so we took up the charge to try to focus on positive civil campaigns, focusing on just the issues, no attacks, not putting out negative ads, and even trying to discourage PACs and other independent groups from attacking your opponent as well. And of course, here it's saying voters say they're sick of negative political ads. You know, the public was saying, we don't want this at all. I don't want my children to see some of these ads. And it's also, if this was a job interview, why would you, just like completely smear the other candidate? It makes no sense. And I heard that from so many people who were voters. And so we held 2 workshops this summer on positive campaigning with 15 individuals each. And it was difficult to get people to come out to do something like that while they're campaigning, but these individuals did, and they committed to running civil campaigns. And we brought in all kinds of political experts and consultants from around the country and let them participate the whole time so that they could offer their perspective as consultants and campaign managers who'd worked in positive and negative zones, but also to see that these legislators want to run positive campaigns, because these people who are doing the consulting often push them in negative ways. And so we wanted them to see that there are legislators who are saying no and pushing back against that. And it was really powerful for them to recognize, oh, there's a changing tide coming in. There's a whole group of legislators who don't want to do that anymore. And they explained to them it's because when you go back into the legislature and try to pass a bill, if you had a very nasty campaign season with the other people, it's not going to go well. And you need something to repair that relationship, but you could go without repairing it if you didn't run ads like that. And so getting into the Revive Civility initiative, so this is nationwide, anyone can participate, but we did choose to focus in 4 deep dive states, mostly due to funding. You gotta be a little limited sometimes, but we decided to try to focus on geographic variety. So we have Arizona, Iowa, Ohio, and Maine, and those are our 4 deep dives. And so Yvette McGee-Brown and Representative Bob Cupp are the co-chairs for Revive Civility Ohio, so they do a lot of promoting this and speaking about it. And so the first thing you can do to join Revive Civility is just take our pledge. And the pledge is very simple, these 4 steps: seeking out a variety of reliable news with different perspectives, listening respectfully, avoiding stereotyping and insulting, encouraging and supporting other efforts to bring people together of different points of view, and inviting people to join this initiative. And at the bottom of the pledge, when you take it, it will ask if you'd like to get more involved and how involved you'd like to be. We recognize people have different amounts of time, so some people might have facilitator skills and say, I want to help train others to facilitate dialogues and whatever else I can do, and others might say, I have some time to maybe participate in like an action or take some type of course with you, or like a one-time event or something like that, but they don't always have the ability to help organize things. So you can self-select what you'd like to participate in. So one of the things that people can do is approach their city council or mayor about issuing a proclamation. Not just a proclamation to say, we think civility is great and we support it. That's not going to do anything. So what we ask is that they actually put out the proclamation with a commitment to following up with actual steps, whether that's multiple community dialogues. Some, like in Cleveland, they've done, the community tours and things where they talk about history, and also have dialogues around issues that affect them locally. They have like panel discussions, and then the groups that participate and listen to the panel will then have table discussions and facilitated dialogues. And so there's a lot of different options of what they can put in the proclamation for commitments later, but we try to get them to be slightly specific so that they can't get out of it, because oftentimes the proclamation gets issued and it doesn't always get followed up with. So our goal is to make it a proclamation that they will be following up with actual actions and have maybe dates set up for when they want to hold those events. And so like I just mentioned, we have like one-on-one conversation guides as well as small group and larger group. And we also have some trainings available for youth and adults. We are working on scheduling facilitator trainings for those who would like to become facilitators in their community, so that we don't personally want to come into any community and facilitate. It's not our role to do that. It'd be much easier for us, and I think more productive and culturally competent, to train those people to facilitate the way that would help them make the conversation more productive and minimize misunderstandings, and let them go ahead and do it, and then tell us how it went and how we can continue to support, but not to actually do it all or really commandeer it. We also have the Text Talk platform, which I'll mention here in a moment, and that's another way to facilitate dialogue without a physical facilitator, but through the phone. So we have a plethora of materials. New will be coming out for this holiday season, but these focus on setting the table at holidays when people are coming together. We had a lot of calls and emails after 2016 and even last year of people saying, we're about to have holidays and we don't know what to do. The family is in chaos and disarray, and lots of stories of like my Uncle Jerry and my cousin Jim or whatever it is. And for me it's my Aunt Carol. And so we wanted to try to help people if they want to have these conversations. And this year we actually are doing something different. We're actually coming up with some ideas for activities they can do if they don't want to talk about politics. Because we've recognized that some groups do. They need to have that conversation about something to clear the air. And others say, no. So we want them to still be able to have some type of conversation that will help them build their relationships and find more common ground, so that maybe later that relationship will be strong enough to handle some of the uncomfortability that comes with discussing those topics. And so a few of the questions, talking about Thanksgiving, of course, you're thinking of what you're thankful for. And since we all live here in America, you can ask, well, what are we thankful for about living here? And also, how do you feel about the deep divisions in our country? And what do you think we can do? Because we need more people thinking of what can we do, and less people thinking, here's what you should do, and just telling people what to do. It's more of a group exploratory process to find out what we should do. We need as many people thinking about that as possible. So with Revive Civility, the beautiful thing about it is if you have an idea of an event or some way you can use the tools, or maybe you think, is there a tool that might be able to be kind of crafted or tweaked to fit this kind of plan that I have? And we would say yes. We're all about evolving the program to fit the needs of everyone. So we've had in Cleveland craft brew and conversation. They have different topics. Sometimes it's on civility. I think that's really neat. Anything can get people out to talk about, or if you have beer, you might be able to get some people to come out and talk, but others, not so much. So this is a way to reach people who feel comfortable going out to have a drink, and then the conversation is just there, so they're willing to do it. And we've also had Beatty and Stivers in Congress. They've actually started there are 3 civility caucuses now in Congress, which is interesting. But they've started the most recent one. And the cool thing about it is they make people, you can't join unless you bring someone from the opposite party. And oftentimes that's what we kind of encourage now, is when other legislators and people come, we say, try to bring someone different. Like if you can't bring the same person, bring someone who shares your ideas. But if you could find someone who doesn't, that would be really great. And They actually invited us to do part of the Next Generation workshop that we do with state legislators with 13 members of Congress who were a part of those committees to see what they thought of that. And they really enjoyed it, so they've invited us back to do a couple more sessions with them, and we're hoping that that will have some type of impact. There's also a group of journalists who formed, has anyone heard of Your Voice Ohio? No? Group of journalists that we worked with who wanted to really change the way they were reporting on the elections and community news, like the opiate crisis and the jobs crisis. And so they decided they were going to be more invested in the community, and instead of just reporting on it, they wanted to be within it, and then talking to people with how do you want this reported? What is the real story here? And so they're still in the process of trying to change that, but they've got about 64 news outlets, I think, working with them now. They're smaller and they're in Ohio, but it's still a really interesting project to watch happen. And they've been holding forums where they bring people in the communities together to discuss opiates and jobs and, the economy. And then they use those forums to then craft the story that they're going to share with the larger public. And they hold these at libraries and other public spaces. And we also have had a National Week of Conversation. There's another one going on actually right now. And we focus on having a few questions for people to discuss, and it's just to help stimulate that conversation, because oftentimes people will avoid getting into some of these topics, and so we're trying to get them more comfortable with actually discussing it. And so another way of getting people comfortable is doing something that people are used to, especially the youth, texting. And so this program was developed initially for talking about mental health and then voting. And then we thought, well, how can we use this for even greater good? Because you can do this with any topic you want to discuss. It's just a script that is programmed into the phone. And so we decided to do it on reviving civility. How can we engage people in a conversation on what civility is, how to have civil discourse, what listening to understand is, how you can improve empathy for people you disagree with, through a very easy, unconfrontational way. So you decided to use the phone. And so some of the key components are defining civility and civil discourse, exercises on active listening and empathy. We actually have them break into pairs and talk about a specific issue that they disagree on, or at least to share their values on that issue and why they feel that way, what's made them feel that way, because a lot of times people don't actually share what caused them to have that feeling, and that can help the other person really understand. So it's all about just trying to get them to go deeper in the conversation, reflecting on their values, and also trying to come up with other ideas for how they can revive civility in their own communities. And there's a really wonderful video that we use in this script and in some of our other programs called Unlikely Friendships, where a LGBT rights activist for over 30 years and a pastor, I believe, and he is the president of American Family Values, a Christian individual who came together for coffee and developed a relationship with each other across their differences, all because she decided to reach out after a friend passed away, because that friend had always been about extending the hand to others, and she decided, how can I honor her in her death, but to try this. And so she reached out to, his name was actually Bob, and they developed a relationship. And then this was in Nebraska, and the University of Omaha decided to make a video about this because it was just such a beautiful relationship, and how they had basically been campaigning for total opposite issues their whole lives, but then decided to become friends. And the video is beautiful. I know I've shared a lot, but I didn't spoil it, I promise. It's really great, and I really recommend it. But also, anyone who would like to try Revive Civility on their own or with any groups, this is one of the efforts or actions you can take to set up with friends, family, or your congregation. People have done it with staff at their workplaces, at retreats. And so you can actually do this. All you have to do is text to the number, like you would put the number in. It's 89800. And I have handouts too, if anyone would like. But you put in 89800 and you text the word civility, and it will come back with a prompt, and you just follow those prompts, and it tells you exactly what to do. It's very simple. We recommend usually about 4 to 6 people doing it, so that people can have enough, they can hear each other and they can have enough time to discuss things. But you can take as long as you want. It typically takes about an hour. And there are a few videos in that script to watch. There are exercises that it asks you to do. A couple times it actually asks for some responses back to kind of hear what is going on in the group, what are the people thinking about this. And I find this exciting because it's like a new way to pull the public. It's anonymous, but it has a zip code attached, so they know where in the area it was. So we've had groups like 4-H in Michigan who've done this with their participants, younger students, and they wanted to know what the responses were from the students to hear what they were saying. So we have a code. If you have a group code, like you're holding an event and doing this, we give you a code, they put that in, and then it all goes into a report. It's really nicely organized so you can see the responses and what people said, and then we send that back to the organizers of that event. That report then can be shared with your mayor, with the state legislature, anyone that you want to see that kind of information. And we also have the ability to craft very specific questions for the participants to answer. That way, if you want something different than what we have, we can do that too. So most everything that we do is really, it's capable of being crafted to meet your specific needs. We develop templates that are kind of the general format, but we understand there's no one size fits all, except for donuts. Everybody likes a big donut, but we want to craft everything to how you need it. So if you ever see anything and think, oh, I would love if this question were included, we would love to hear that because we want to hear that feedback. And we often have other options of questions that can go in that we can say, well, here's some options that are not included, but others have shared with us that they like these questions better. So nothing's ever set in stone. And for those who are like, no cell phones, not doing that, and that's understood, especially in schools. Sometimes teachers, they don't want the phones out. It's too distracting because kids could just get on Facebook or something. So we have paper-based discussion guides, and teachers can lead it, or so if someone wants to be like the leader of an organized event and do this with a group, say at their church, you could just put it on a PowerPoint and watch the videos all together, have the questions up all together. It's really easy, and we will send you all of that, and we'll help you know how to do it, and so then it should feel pretty natural when you actually do it with your group. So we also created a few handouts. We put them online. They can be shared on social media or handed out to individuals. And some of them talk about fostering social media or fostering civility on social media. It's very tiny. I don't expect anyone to read that. But these are all on our websites, and we're creating more. We also have one about how to manage your own self-care when you're in a very stressful situation and conversation. Because especially with youth, they don't always recognize that when they start to get warm and when their heart's beating, it's okay. Your body is naturally responding to stress because something is stimulating you to feel that way. And so we try to help them learn to slow down, take a breath, and to recognize that their body is doing what it's supposed to, and it's okay. But it does make it harder to talk and be civil when your heart's beating fast and you can't really catch your breath. And so here's a couple others. We try to make it a little bit fun, so tips to avoid the food fight, making sure everyone's comfortable, letting everybody know your intentions. If you are going to talk about politics, people might need to know that in advance, Also making sure that everyone has the same agreements and they're all intending to listen, to learn, and be open. Because if you have a few individuals who aren't, that can really shut down a lot more people in the group. I'm sure everybody's kind of experienced that before. When some individuals aren't open, it can influence, just like if some are open, it can influence others to do the same. And then we had a 20-question game, which is infiltrated with some more deep questions to try to stimulate that, intellectual, what's really the deep cause behind these feelings, but also some fun things like who in the group would be best suited to run for public office and why. And I know in my family, most of the people were saying how they couldn't run for office, but it's still interesting. And I definitely feel like when I did this with my family last year, I'm very close with them, and I learned really beautiful things from both my grandma and my grandpa, and I was really happy that I did it. It was a fun little activity that you just print these little sheets out and cut them up, and there you go. We're creating another one this year for both people who want to talk politics and don't, and then we also have some new table settings and new jokes. This year's is addressing the turkey in the room. I like it because I'm vegan and I don't have to worry about them talking about eating the turkey. So going back to like the overall picture of what resources NICD has available, the question of where are the opportunities, I think, is valid because people think, well, where do I fit in? Like, what can I do? That's a lot of different stuff. Like, how do you actually do it? Well, some of the tasks are very personal, things you can just do with family, friends, work, and faith groups. And then there are the opportunities to get involved with the larger dialogues within the neighborhood. We have the museums of art really interested in holding events and dialogues there for a greater population because they have the space and they feel that art is it's so cross-cultural. You know, art is just it's a different area. I would say, I almost feel like most art isn't intentionally political, though it is politicized sometimes, but there's something about art that's really, I think, sacred and beautiful. And so the museums have recognized that they would like to take a place in a more neutral zone because sometimes they're often associated with more left-leaning liberal groups, and they don't want conservatives to feel like they can't come there to participate or for a dialogue. So they're trying to kind of change their identity. And libraries, we found, are some of the greatest places to have these conversations because they are spaces for all. And they aren't really associated with any economic group or any party. So that's been a really wonderful place to hold events. And everybody has a library in their community where they could go and say, I want to hold an event, or are you holding any events like this already? Because I've been invited to Bethel and Bexley and a few other places to share kind of some presentations on the tools and things they can do. And so they might already be doing some things. And also youth groups are really excellent. We're working with some groups out in Oregon and Seattle right now who are passionate about bullying, and they want to end bullying not just within their schools, but they see the legislators and sometimes the president as bullying. So they wanted to address that. And so we've been working with those groups to help them learn how to have dialogues, listen for understanding, even facilitate their own youth circles, and so that they can take action together and collaborate. Because if there's anything that I think I've learned is that we can all work on all kinds of issues, but if we can't discuss and figure out how to actually come up with a strategy that correlates with the values that we share, then those issues will remain. So trying to teach youth, I think, is a huge tool because we're preparing, I think, the huge change makers of the future. And in institutions, obviously, the Next Generation program has been in Ohio, but we would love to hold more workshops in Ohio and do more work there. So if anyone is interested, and we have others who may not be from Ohio, I'm not sure, but you can approach your state legislature and say, I would encourage you to hold a workshop for the legislators on civil discourse. And we've had many members of the public approach legislators to do this, and then those legislators approach their leadership, and in some instances it's worked out really well. To have a little more clout, sometimes that person can go with a group that they're affiliated with, faith group or an organization. Even local businesses have a lot of weight to share with those legislators and say, we really want you to do this, and this is why. And for the legislators, you know, that's their constituent base coming to them saying this, and who wouldn't be happy that their legislature is holding an event to actually focus on having a better session, a more civil session, because it's not just about how they correspond with each other, but with the public. And we try to also use these trainings to teach them that they can use this in their communities. So we've had a lot of legislators who work with us also have community events where they teach facilitation and civil discourse skills in their districts. That's all I have, but I did bring some handouts that we'll leave at the back of the room that go over all of the different resources that I just discussed, and there's links and everything, and I believe there are links, and you can find this information, and I'm happy to give anyone my email. It's actually right there. Yeah, but if you can't see it, I'm happy to talk with you, give you my email, and help you take further action if you're interested. So thank you for listening to that.